All right. Good morning, everybody. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, first half of book 10, Discourse 18. I just wanted to actually had one comment I wanted to make on the end of last section's reading before we start that I had meant to mention this, but we got into some other people asked some questions and we're talking at the end, and I forgot to mention. So the last big story we had was the driving out of the Kalyanaga from Vrindavana, and how he and his Naga kin were given the island of Ramanaka as their home. Just an interesting note. The island of Ramanaka, the island then called Ramanaka, is generally thought to be the island now called Fiji, the island country of Fiji. Its population of Fiji is close to a third Hindu, and the Hindus of Fiji all consider it to be Ramanaka and mostly call it Ramanaka. And they worship it still as a sanctuary of Nagas. Nagas, like Kalya Naga, are like local village deities for Hindus in Fiji and such. So just thought that was an interesting thing to mention in context of the story of how they ended up getting sent there. So Discourse 18 is the Lord slays the demon Pralamba. Sri Shuka began again. Most of the population of the Vrindavana village just spent the night out in the forest together and are headed home the next day. Surrounded by his kinsfolk, who were delighted at heart and being glorified by them, Sri Krishna presently entered Vraja graced with herds of cows. While the two brothers, Krishna and Balarama, were thus sporting in diverse ways in Vraja in the guise of cowherds by recourse to their Maya, there set in the season going by the name of summer, which is not very agreeable to embodied beings, especially in North India. It was, however, regarded by the people of Vraja as though it were spring, due to the peculiarities of Vrindavana, where stayed in person Lord Sri Krishna along with Balarama. There the chirping of crickets was drowned in the loud murmur of cascades, and the land was adorned with clusters of trees ever wet with their spray. Due to a breeze blowing over the ripples of streams, ponds, and rills, conveying the pollen of kahlaras, lotuses, and water lilies, and that woodland abounding in green meadows, the heat radiating from the summer fires and the summer sun was not felt by the denizens of the forest. The sun's rays, fierce as poison, in that area did not suck up the moisture or the verdant character of the earth, whose mud, along with the sandy banks, was kept moist on all sides by the waves beating against the banks of rivers containing unfathomable water. That glorious woodland was full of blossoms and teemed with various animals and birds giving forth cries, peacocks uttering sweet notes, and humming bees, as well as with warbling cuckoos and cackling cranes. Accompanied by Balarama and surrounded by cowherds and the cattle wealth, which is of course the cows, and intending to sport, Lord Sri Krishna entered that forest, playing on his flute. Adorned with tender leaves, plumes of peacocks, bunches and wreaths of flowers, and minerals of various kinds, the Gopas, of whom Balarama and Sri Krishna were the foremost, danced, wrestled, and sang. While Sri Krishna danced, some sang, whereas others produced sounds with their flutes, palms, and horns, while still others shouted applause. The gods in the guise of cowherds extolled Sri Krishna and Balarama, who were similarly disguised as Gopa boys, even as dancers would praise their chief, O protector of men. Wearing side locks, their hair in side locks after the fashion of the day, the two brothers now diverted themselves by revolving in pairs with their hands clasped together, long jumps, putting the weight, slapping the arms, tug of war, and wrestling. Sometimes, while others danced, the two brothers themselves sang or sounded the instruments or applauded the dancers, O Maharaja, by exclaiming, "Well done, bravo!" They would now play with bilva fruits, now with kumbha fruits, and now with handfuls of myrobalans, and now divert themselves by not allowing others to touch one's person, now by shutting another's eyes. It's part of a whole game. And other similar sports, and now by mimicking beasts and birds, now by leaping like frogs and cutting jokes of various kinds, now by swinging with the help of the boughs of trees, and now by playing the part of kings. In this way they rambled in the forest, diverting themselves with popular sports in streams, mountain valleys, and bowers, as well as in woods and ponds. One day, while Balarama and Sri Krishna were grazing the cattle in that forest in the company of other Gopas, a demon named Pralamba arrived there in the guise of a cowherd boy, with intent to kidnap the two brothers. Though knowing him in his real character, the all-perceiving lord who had appeared in the race of the Dasharahas approved of his friendship, contemplating the means of killing him, meaning pretended not to recognize him and let him slip in among them as if he was one of the friends. Calling by his side to that spot all the Gopas, Sri Krishna, who was well versed in play, said, "O cowherd boys, let us play dividing ourselves suitably into two camps." In other words, a team game, dividing into two teams. In that game, the Gopa boys made Balarama and Sri Krishna their leader. Some of them joined, so Balarama leads one team, Sri Krishna leads one team. So some of them joined the group of Sri Krishna, while others took the side of Balarama. They played various games, which were characterized by the role of mounts, in the case of one party, and that of riders, in the case of the other party. In these games, those who won rode, while the worsted ones carried the former. So they're doing things like a team game, whichever team wins gets to ride on the shoulders of the losing team for some distance. Thus carrying and being carried and pasturing their cattle wealth, they all, with Sri Krishna going ahead, reached a banyan tree, Bhandiraka by name. It's, the name of the tree is Bhandiraka. When on one occasion, Sri Dama, Vrashabha, and others, who had taken the side of Balarama, had the upper hand in the game, Sri Krishna and others, a protector of men, carried them. Having been worsted, Lord Sri Krishna bore Sri Dama, Bhadrasena carried Vrashabha, and Pralamba, the demon, who had slipped in among them, carried Balarama, the son of Rohini. Thinking Sri Krishna to be unbearable, and acting as a mount for Balarama, Pralamba, he figured, in other words, he figures that Balarama is going to be the easier of the two to go to target first. Pralamba, the foremost among the Danavas, ran post-haste beyond the limit fixed for demounting the riders, attempting to carry off Balarama into the woods. Bearing on his back Balarama, who had assumed the weight of Mount Meru, the mighty demon found that his speed had altogether disappeared, and having resumed his own demoniac form, and adorned with gold ornaments, he shone like a cloud illumined with flashes of lightning, and bearing the moon on its back. Balarama, the wielder of a plow for a weapon, felt a bit afraid to perceive that body soaring in the skies at a great speed with burning eyes and hair glowing as flames, and with its fearful tusks reaching the end of its contracted eyebrows, and looking uncanny with the splendor of its bracelets, coronae, and earrings. Balarama, to whom self-consciousness, the knowledge of his own divinity, had returned the very next moment, and who was rid of the fear that had just for a brief moment struck him, caught up as he was in the Leela of playing a cowherd boy, hit the enemy who was carrying him through the sky as though it were some treasure found by him, in great rage on the head with his strong fist, which descended with the vehemence of a thunderbolt, even as Indra, the ruler of the Devas, would strike a mountain. With his head smashed forthwith and deprived of his consciousness when struck by Balarama, and vomiting blood, the said demon fell dead, uttering a loud cry, as a mountain struck with the weapon of Indra. Seeing Pralamba slain by the mighty Balarama, the Gopas felt highly amazed and shouted, "Well done, bravo!" Uttering benedictions on him and embracing him as though he had returned to life after death, they extolled him, deserving as he was of such praise, their mind overwhelmed with affection. Supremely gratified on the sinful Pralamba having been slain, the gods covered Bala with flowers and applauded him, also exclaiming, "Well done, bravo." Thus ends the 18th discourse, entitled "The Lord Slays Pralamba," in this case being the Lord Balarama, and the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 19, the Lord swallows up a wildfire again. Sri Shuka began again. While the Gopa boys were absorbed in play, their cows, grazing at will, strayed afar, and tempted by green grass, entered a dense forest. Moving from forest to forest, the she-goats, cows, and she-buffaloes felt thirsty from heat, and wailing loudly entered a thicket of rushes. Not perceiving the cattle, Sri Krishna, Balarama, and the other Gopas were now filled with remorse for having not been paying attention, and the herd wandered off while they were busy playing with each other, but could not find any trace of the cows, even though they searched for them. The Gopas, whose very means of livelihood had been lost and who felt perturbed, all followed the track of the cows with the help of the blades of grass cut by their hoofs and teeth and marked by their footprints. Having duly found their cattle wealth, whose passage had been intercepted in that thicket of rushes and who was piteously crying, the cowherds, who were seized with thirst and felt exhausted, successfully drove the herd back from the thicket. Called by the Lord in a tone deep as the rumbling of clouds, the cows responded to his call, overjoyed as they were to hear the shouting of their names. Presently, by the will of Providence, there broke out on all sides a huge wildfire, playing havoc with the inhabitants of the forest, and lapping with its tongue-like fearful flames the animate and inanimate beings, now that it was fanned by the wind. The Gopas, as well as the cows, felt dismayed to discern the forest conflagration advancing on every side, and flying for succor to Sri Krishna and Balarama, even as people stricken with the fear of death would seek Sri Hari, spoke, "O Krishna, the enchanter of all, O mighty hero, O Rama of immeasurable prowess, be pleased to protect us, who are being burnt by a wildfire and have sought you. Surely your relations, O Krishna, do not deserve to undergo suffering. We have, as a matter of fact, you as our protector and ultimate refuge, O knower of all righteousness." Sri Shuka continued. Hearing the piteous prayer of his friends, Lord Sri Hari said, "Shut your eyes and do not be afraid." When they had shut their eyes, saying, "Be it so," the Lord, the master of the mystic powers of yoga, swallowed up the terrible fire and thus completely rid them of the peril. Nay, on opening their eyes, they stood amazed to find themselves, as well as the cows, rescued and brought to Bhandira. Back to Bhandira is this huge, famous banyan tree that we already mentioned. Elsewhere, there's so in the site of all of these events have been found in the Vrindavana region, and the tree Bhandira was 10 miles away from the thicket of rushes where they were. So they're amazed to find themselves not only that the fire is gone, but that they were just teleported 10 miles while they had their eyes closed. Perceiving that yogic power of Sri Krishna, manifested by his Yoga Maya, which had brought about their deliverance from a wildfire, they believed him to be an immortal. Driving back the cows at eventide, Sri Krishna, who was solicited by the people, accompanied by Balarama, withdrew to Vraja, playing on his flute and extolled on all sides by Gopa boys. Supreme was the joy of the gopis of Vraja at the sight of Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, in whose absence a single moment hung heavy on them as 100 yugas. Thus ends the 19th discourse, entitled Sri Krishna Swallows Up a Wildfire Again, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 20, a description of the rains and autumn. So the monsoon season and the autumn season. Sri Shuka began again. The Gopa boys narrated at full length to the women folk that extraordinary feat of the two brothers in the shape of their deliverance from a wildfire, and even so the destruction of Pralamba. Astonished to hear it, the elderly among the Gopas and the Gopi women too thought Sri Krishna and Balarama to be two foremost gods come down to Vraja. So they're gradually figuring it out. At first, when he was a baby, they thought that he was miraculously surviving demons. At this point, they think that they're both great gods. Then commenced the rainy season, conducive to the growth of all creatures, as being favorable to their breeding and nourishment both, characterized by bright circles and around the sun and the moon and thundering heavens. Yeah, sure. Radha was suggesting if we wanted to stop, if anyone had any comments to make. Yeah, feel free. If anybody has any questions also, I'm happy to go into anything. So let me know, but pending that, we can keep going. So at the start of the monsoon season, This characterized by bright circles, meaning that since it's often misty or partly cloudy, the sky isn't clear, that there's kind of halos around the sun and the moon because they're often shining through kind of foggy weather or clouds, and thundering heavens. Overcast with dense and dark clouds attended with lightning and thunder, with the luminaries rendered obscure, the sky shone as Brahman, the universal spirit, conditioned by the three gunas. The metaphor being here is that the conditioned Brahman is known as the jiva, with its light of wisdom, like the sun or the moon, obscured by sattva, rajas, and tamas, corresponding to sattva being like the flashes of lightning, rajas being like the roaring of the thunder, and tamas being like the dark clouds. When the time came, the sun god began to release the wealth of the earth in the form of water that had been absorbed by him during the past 8 months. In other words, how since the heat of the sun had caused the evaporation of moisture, and now through recondensation, it's returning as rain. Even as a righteous monarch would return to the people the wealth which he extorted from them in the form of land revenue and other legitimate taxes. Huge clouds endowed with lightning-like eyes, and perceiving the heat of the world, and tossed by tempestuous winds, poured down water, which brings joy to this world, even as the compassionate, observing the miserable plight of the world and stirred with a feeling of commiseration for the afflicted, lay down their very life and thus bring delight to the world. Shrunk through the summer heat, the earth grew plump again when drenched by heaven, even as the body of a man engaged in austerities performed for attaining some selfish end, which is emaciated through such austerities, grows corpulent again upon realizing the fruit of those austerities. It is the fireflies and not the planets that shine at the approach of night, shrouded in darkness, because the sky is thickly coated with clouds. Even as it is heresies or ignorance and not the Vedas that flourish in the age of Kali, contaminated with sin, born of ignorance that clouds the judgment. Frogs that had been silently hibernating before began to utter their croaks on hearing the roar of clouds, even as Brahmana pupils at the end of their daily routine of devotions, during which they observe complete silence, and on hearing the call of their guru, would begin their recitation of the Vedas. Small streams that were gradually drying up now overflowed their channel again, as the bodily resources and material riches of a man who has no self-control flow in a wrong channel. The earth looked green with its green meadows, crimson with the Indragopas. Indragopas are a species of red insects that have a velvety skin, and shaded whitish by whitish mushrooms that are sprouting up, even as the army of kings is arrayed in uniforms of various colors. Fields with their wealth of crops afforded delight to the cultivators and caused agony to the rich who envied their lot and did not know that everything lay in the hands of Providence. All the inhabitants of land and water put on a winning form and appearance through the use of fresh rainwater, even as devotees attain an attractive spiritual form through the worship of Sri Hari. United with rivers, the ocean, which was already rough with waves generated by winds, became all the more turbulent. Like the mind of an immature yogi, tinged with desire, gets agitated when brought into contact with sense objects. Beaten by volleys of rain, mountains did not feel the least agitated, any more than those whose mind is fixed on Lord Vishnu when they are overwhelmed with calamities. Overgrown with grass and remaining untrodden for a long time, the tracks became doubtful indeed. In other words, hard to discern where the trails in the woods were because they're all lushly overgrown. Like the texts of the Vedas, which are not properly studied by the Brahmanas and are consigned to oblivion by the force of time. Flashes of lightning did not bear constancy to the clouds, which are the friends of the people, any more than libidinous women are constant to men possessed of virtues. In the sky, endowed with the attribute of sound, the rainbow, the Sanskrit word for rainbow, Indradhanush, literally means Indra's bow. The rainbow without a string shone like an attributeless pure being or pure Brahman in the manifest world consisting of the three gunas. So that line makes a pun in Sanskrit, the pun is lost in translation because the word guna, in addition to meaning a quality, also is a word for a string. And so to say the stringless bow, it literally is to say the bow, the nirguna bow. Screened by clouds illumined by her own effulgence, the moon did not shine any more than a jiva obscured by the ego sense, which is illumined by its own light. Exulting over the appearance of clouds, with their hair standing on end, peacocks rejoiced, even as householders, feeling agonized and disgusted with the world, do on the advent of servants of the immortal Lord Sri Krishna. Sucking water through their roots, trees that had shrunk heretofore due to the summer heat and the attending dry season got regenerated into numerous forms in the shape of putting out fresh foliage, blossoms, fruits, etc. Even as ascetics that are emaciated and fatigued before, through austerities grow robust again through the enjoyment of pleasures when they're finished with a period of austerities. Cranes continued to live, O Parikshit, even in lakes whose brink was miry and full of thorns, etc., even as householders whose mind is devoted to the pleasures of sense choose to remain in their houses, which keep them engaged in distracting duties. While Indra, the ruler of the three worlds, poured down showers, dams got breached by floods, even as in the Kali Yuga, the paths of virtue chalked out by the Vedas are destroyed by the false theories of heretics. Driven by the winds, clouds now poured down nectar-like water to living beings, even as rulers of men, directed by the Brahmanas, conferred from time to time desired boons on those who sought them. Surrounded by cows and gopa boys and accompanied by Balarama, Sri Hari entered deep into the said forest of Vrindavana, which was so luxuriant and full of ripe dates and rose apples, in order to sport. Called by the Lord, cows that walked with a slow gait due to the heavy weight of their udders, marched with quick steps, their udders showering milk on the way due to affection. As he passed through the woods, the Lord perceived the denizens of the forest, the bhilas as well as the birds and beasts, highly rejoiced, rows of trees dripping with honey, streams of water flowing from mountains as well as their murmur, and the calves near them. At times, when it rained on all sides, the Lord took shelter in the hollow of a tree or in a cave, and sported there eating bulbs, roots, and fruits. Accompanied by Sankarshana, who is Balarama, he ate rice and curds brought from home, with vegetables, etc., on a slab close to the water in the company of cowherd boys. Beholding fully gratified bulls, calves, and cows, weary with the weight of their udders, sitting on the green meadows and ruminating with their eyes closed, as well as the aforesaid splendor of the rainy season, enhanced by his own enrapturing energy and bringing delight to all created beings, the Lord welcomed them all. While Balarama and Sri Krishna thus dwelt in Vraja, there fully set in the autumnal season, so following the monsoon, free from clouds and characterized by crystal waters and gentle breezes. Due to the autumn, marked with the appearance of lotuses, waters regained their transparency, even as the minds of those that have strayed from the path of yoga recover their purity by resuming the practice of yoga. The autumn drove away the clouds from the sky, relieved the congestion of living beings, dried up the mire of the earth, and eliminated the turbidity of water, even as devotion to Sri Krishna puts an end to all evil, besetting those belonging to the four ashramas of life. Having discharged all their wealth in the form of water, the clouds shone forth in their white luster, like ascetics that have given up all forms of desire and have shed their impurity in the shape of tendency to action and have become composed. At some places, the mountains released their pure water, whereas at other places they did not. Even as enlightened souls impart their nectar-like wisdom on some opportune occasions to the qualified, while at other times they do not. The creatures living in shallow waters did not at all notice the water diminishing day by day, even as stupid householders do not perceive their span of life shortening every day. Like a destitute and helpless householder who has not been able to subdue his senses, suffering hardships, the creatures living in shallow waters experienced the heat radiated by the autumnal sun, drying up the puddles in which they're briefly living. Virgin tracts of land gradually gave up their moisture and the plants their unripe state, even as the wise slowly give up the sense of identification with and the feeling of mindness with respect to the body, etc., which are not the true self. On the advent of the autumn, the ocean became calm and quiet, meaning at the points where at the mouths of rivers, where the flow of rivers became gentler and less strong into the ocean. Even as an ascetic is relieved of his recitation of the Vedas, when his mind is completely at rest, having reached transcendence through the practice of reciting the Vedas. Cultivators checked the water going out of the fields by means of strong dams, even as those practicing yoga preserve the wisdom flowing out through the senses by controlling the senses. The moon alleviated the suffering of living beings caused by the rays of the autumnal sun, even as the dawn of wisdom puts an end to the miseries born of one's identification with the body, or as Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, relieves the agony caused by separation from him, of the women of Raja. The cloudless sky looked charming at night with its stars twinkling brightly due to the autumnal season, like the mind with the quality of sattva predominating in it and revealing the import of the Vedas. The full moon shone in the firmament with the hosts of stars, even as on the earth did Sri Krishna, the protector of the Yadus, surrounded by the circle of Vrishnis. Vrishnis being the whole Yadava race who compose, all of the people of Vrindavana are the Gopa Abhira Yadava, part of the Vrishni clan. Embracing the temperate breeze that blew from the woods in full blossom, people dismissed their anguish occasioned by the heat of the day. But not so the Gopi women of Raja, whose mind had been captivated by Sri Krishna, inasmuch as it tended to enhance the poignancy of their agony of separation from the Lord caused by his absence from Raja during the daytime. Persistently sought by their partners, cows, she-deer, female birds, and women conceived under the influence of the autumnal season, even as works intended to propitiate the Lord are necessarily followed by their fruit. At sunrise, all aquatic flowers bloomed forth with the exception of water lilies, even as all people, barring the thieves, are rendered fearless under a good Raja. Enriched with ripe corns, the earth looked happy, with Vedic sacrifices carried on with oblations of first fruits at the end of the rainy season, as well as with other grand festivals conducted for the gratification of the senses in cities and villages, and more so with Sri Krishna and Balarama, the two avatars of Sri Hari. Going out at the end of the 4 months of the rainy season, merchants, recluses, kings, and students about to return from the house of their guru after the completion of their studies that had been detained by the rains, because according to custom, the 4 months of the rainy season are regarded as inopportune for commercial trips, Rajas' expeditions from their home, for marriages, and for recluses to move about. All of those people traditionally stay put in one place for those 4 months. They now went forth and realized their ends, even as those adept in yoga and well-versed in mantras and mystic formulae, impeded by the span of their life, attain ethereal forms earned by them when the appropriate time comes. In the metaphor, the appropriate time being death. Thus ends the 20th discourse, entitled A Description of the Rains and Autumn, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 21, the song inspired by the flute. Sri Sukha began again. Accompanied by cows and Gopa boys, Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, entered deep into the aforesaid forest, with its waters made transparent by the autumn and fanned by a breeze charged with the fragrance of lotus beds. Having entered the forest, the lakes and streams, as well as the mountains of which were resonant with the sweet warbling of birds and the sweet humming of bees, intoxicated by the presence of rows of trees in full bloom, and pasturing the cows in the company of Balarama and other Gopas, Lord Sri Krishna, the protector of the Madhus, sounded his flute. Hearing that entrancing music of Sri Krishna's flute, which kindled love in their heart, some women of Vraja proceeded to celebrate it in song before their female companions, all out of his sight. Recalling the loving gestures of Sri Krishna while commencing to describe the music, they, however, could not, their mind being distracted by the vehemence of love, O protector of men. Exhibiting before their mental eyes an exquisite form resembling that of an actor on the stage, adorned with a crest of peacock feathers, wearing karnikara flowers on his ears, a wreath of flowers of 5 different colors, and a golden cloth around his loins, and filling the holes of his flute with the nectar of his lips. They felt the Lord enter Vrindavana forest, charming with his footprints found at every step, his glory being sung by hosts of Gopa boys. Hearing, O Parikshit, the music of his flute, captivating to the mind of all living beings and celebrating it, all those women of Vraja mentally embraced the Lord. The gopis sang, "This is the prize for those who have eyes, friends, and we know of no greater prize than that enjoyed by those who have feasted their eyes on the countenance, playing on the flute and casting loving glances of the 2 sons of Nanda, the Lord of Vraja, as they lead the cattle along with their playmates. Singing at times amidst a circle of cowherd boys, and picturesquely clad in a garment fitted closely with tender mango leaves, peacock feathers, and bunches of flowers tucked to their curly locks, a pair of lilies fastened to their ears, a lotus held in the right hand, and a garland worn about the neck. The 2 brothers look most charming, like a pair of excellent actors on stage. O gopis, what meritorious act has this flute performed, by virtue of which it freely enjoys to its heart's content the nectar flowing from the lips of Sri Krishna?" Or they referred to him as Damodara. Though a monopoly of the gopis, in other words, that the nectar flowing from the lips of Sri Krishna they claim as their rightful monopoly, so that nothing but sweetness is left behind. Lo, the rivers appear with their hair standing on end, in the form of the lotuses blooming through rapture when they hear the sound of his flute, while the bamboo trees themselves are shedding tears of joy in the shape of honey, even as the elders of a family are delighted to find their child enjoying the grace of the Lord. Vrindavana, O friend, enhances the glory of the earth, and that the soil has been graced by the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the son of Yashoda, and further because, witnessing the dance of peacocks, enraptured to hear the music of Sri Krishna's flute, which they mistake for the low rumbling of clouds, all other creatures on the summits of Mount Govardhana cease from every activity and stand motionless, a thing which is not seen in any other sphere. Blessed indeed are these female deer, though stupid of mind, compared to a human, of course, that on hearing the music of the flute offered in the company of the male deer, the black antelopes, worship performed through their loving glances to the darling of Nanda, who has put on a wonderful garb. Gazing on Sri Krishna, whose comeliness and amiable disposition are a source of joy to the fair sex, and hearing the weird notes of the flute played on by him, celestial women riding in aerial vimanas stood infatuated, deprived of their presence of mind through love, flowers dropping from their braids and their skirts unsettled. Drinking with the cup of their ears, standing erect, the nectar-like music of the flute flowing from Sri Krishna's lips, and hugging Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, in their mind, on his entering their mind through their eyes. The cows, as well as their calves, stood motionless with drops of tears in their eyes, the mouths of the latter remaining filled with the draught of milk flowing from the dripping udders of their mothers, having no strength left in them to swallow the milk, so utterly focused are they on the sound of Krishna's flute. In all probability, O mother, the birds dwelling in this forest are no other than sages, who, having perched on the boughs of trees clothed with charming foliage, so that they may be able to behold Sri Krishna and hear the dulcet music of the flute poured forth by him with unwinking eyes, other voices having altogether ceased for them. Hearing the aforesaid music of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, on that occasion, even the rivers that had their rapid flow arrested through love for Sri Krishna betrayed by eddies, clasped both the feet of Sri Krishna, the slayer of the demon Mura, with the arms of their waves in such a way as to fold them in their embrace, offering lotuses as a symbol of their heart. Witnessing with the eyes of lightning Sri Krishna duly pasturing the cattle of Raja in the company of Balarama and the other Gopa boys in the hot sun, and playing on the flute in their rear, a cloud appeared over his head, and swollen with love did the service of an umbrella to its friend Sri Krishna, with its body, covering him at the same time with showers of flowers. Fully accomplished of their purpose are the Bhila women. The Bhila people are the forest-dwelling people who already lived in the woods here before the Gopa Abhira nomads moved in. Fully accomplished of their purpose are the Bhila women who, when smitten with pangs of love at the Lord's sight, dismissed that agony, besmearing their face and breasts with the saffron paste, originally painted on the bosom of his darling and rendered still more charming by contact with the reddish hue of the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, who is widely celebrated and ultimately transferred to the blades of grass. This mountain Govardhana, O fair ones, is the foremost of Sri Hari's servants, and that it not only derives supreme joy from the touch of the feet of Balarama and Sri Krishna, but also extends its hospitality to the two brothers, along with their cows and followers, through the fresh and pure water of its cascades, excellent pasture, caves affording shelter to them, and its produce in the form of bulbs and roots. It is most wonderful that due to the highly delightful notes consisting of low and sweet tones of the flutes of the two brothers, leading the cows from one forest to another in the company of Gopa boys, and distinguished by a string for tying the hind legs of cows while milking them, and a cord for pulling unruly cows, there should ensue among the embodied beings, O friends, complete lack of movement in those capable of locomotion, in even the running streams, and a thrill of joy should appear in the trees. Recounting to one another such leelas that pertained to the Lord who moved about in Vrindavana, the gopis became mentally absorbed in those leelas. Thus ends the 21st discourse entitled A Song Inspired by the Lord's Flute, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 22. The Lord steals away the garments of the gopi maids. Sri Shuka began again. In the first month, Margashirsha month, of the Hemanta season, the maids of Raja, ruled over by Nanda, observed a vow of worshipping the goddess Katyayani, subsisting on only such food as is fit to be offered to the sacrificial fire. Having taken a dip in the waters of the Kalindi, which the river more often called the Yamuna, at daybreak, and making an image of sand on the riverbank, so they making a murti of Katyayani out of wet sand, they worshipped the goddess in that image, O protector of men, with sandal paste, etc., fragrant flowers, propitiatory oblations, such as oblations of coconut water or coconut milk, incense and lights, other offerings, such as articles of wearing apparel, ornaments, etc., high and low, as well as with tender leaves, fruits, and unbroken grains of rice. Unbroken meaning unhusked, rice still in its husk. The aforesaid virgins performed worship, each muttering the following prayer. Goddess Katyayani, the great deluding potency, possessed of infinite yogic powers, O supreme ruler of the universe, pray make Sri Krishna, the darling of Nanda the cowherd chief, my husband, hail to you. With their mind and heart set on Sri Krishna, the maidens thus observed the sacred vow for a whole month, the entire month of Margashirsha, and worshipped goddess Bhadrakali with due ceremony, praying, let the darling of Nanda be our husband. Rising early in the morning when called by their names, they loudly sang the praises of Sri Krishna as they went with their hands mutually clasped to bathe in the Kalindi every day. Arriving at the river on a certain day, the last day of the month, in this case, the full moon day, the day of the conclusion of their month-long vrata, and leaving their clothes on the bank as usual, they merrily sported in the water, glorifying Sri Krishna. Coming to know of this and surrounded by his companions, Sri Krishna, the Lord of Masters of Yoga, went there in order to reward their act of worship. Taking their clothes, he hastily climbed up a kadamba tree nearby, and indulging in fun with the laughing boys, so the tradition goes, jestingly spoke as follows: "Come here, O maids, receive you each your own raiment at will. I speak the truth and am not jesting, since you are exhausted by your vow. Never has a lie been told by me before. These boys know it. Take your clothes one by one or all together as you please, O slender-waisted ones." Perceiving that joke of the Lord, the Gopi maids were overwhelmed with love. Abashed to see one another, they felt inclined to laugh, but did not come out of the water. When Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, remarked thus, the Gopi maids, whose mind was enraptured by the joke and who stood shivering, immersed as they were up to the neck in the cold water, spoke to him as follows. Also because Margashirsha month is in the winter season. So in North India like that, the air will never get exactly cold, but it's not warm. Definitely standing in the water for a long time, you could get cold. And they spoke to him. "Pray do no wrong by us. We know you well to be the beloved son of Nanda, the cowherd chief, and praised all over Vraja, O dear Krishna. Please return our clothes, we are shivering. O fair one with a dark complexion, we are your servants and are prepared to do your bidding. Give back our clothes, O knower of dharma. If not, we shall report the matter to the king," meaning to Nanda, Krishna's father. The glorious Lord said, "If you are my servants and if you will do my bidding, come here and receive your clothes, wearing a bright smile." Shivering with cold, all of the maidens thereupon emerged from the river, shrunk with cold and covering their privy parts with their palms. Perceiving them as good as dead through embarrassment, and pleased with their pure heart, the Lord placed the clothes, kept so far on the tree, on his shoulder, and full of love, smilingly said, "Since having undertaken a sacred vow, you took a dip in the waters in a nude state, that has indeed been an offense on your part against the god of water, Varuna Deva. Therefore, receive your raiment after joining your palms on the crown of your head and bowing low for the expiation of that sin." Realizing their act of plunging in water in a nude state to be a violation of the vow, technically, as pointed out in the aforesaid words by Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, and seeking the fulfillment of that vow, since the technical script of the vrata, they said, you're supposed to bathe wearing your clothes. That's what he's pointing out. The maidens of Raja bowed to Sri Krishna, for it is he who washes away all transgressions. Seeing them bent in the aforesaid manner and propitiated through such salutation, the all-merciful Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, returned their clothes. Even though they were badly taken in, stripped of shame, ridiculed, and treated like toys, and their clothes had been stolen away, yet they found no fault with him, highly gratified as they were through the company of their beloved Lord. Having put on their clothes, they riveted their bashful looks on Sri Krishna and could not stir from that place, enthralled as they were by their meeting with their most beloved Lord, and their mind having been captivated by him. Perceiving the intention of those maidens that had undertaken the aforesaid vow with a longing to touch his feet, Lord Sri Krishna, here referred to as Lord Damodara, addressed the girls. "Your desire, O chaste girls, in the shape of eagerness to worship me is already known to me. It has been approved of by me. It deserves to materialize. The craving for enjoyment on the part of those whose mind is devoted to me cannot lead to further enjoyment, even as seeds of grain, once fried or boiled, are not, as a general rule, intended to be sown." In other words, that it will not lead on to worldly sense enjoyments other than to him. "Go back, O damsels, to Vraja. You stand accomplished of your purpose, and will sport with me during the coming nights, for which purpose you have observed this vow in the form of worship of the goddess, O virtuous girls." Sri Shuka continued, "Thus commanded by the Lord, and having realized their ambition, the maidens returned to Vraja with great difficulty. Difficulty because it's greatly difficult for them to leave him, even briefly, contemplating on his lotus feet. Accompanied by Gopa boys and pasturing the cows, Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, one day, during the following hot weather, went far away from Vrindavana, along with his elder brother Balarama. Perceiving the trees, which played the role of umbrellas to him with their shade in the scorching rays of the summer sun, so this is like 6 months later now, or 4 to 6-ish months later. The Lord addressed the cowherd boys of Raja. O Stota Krishna, Anshu, Sridama, Subala, Arjuna, Vishala, Rishabha, Tejasvi, Nevaprastha, and Varutapa. These are the names of his friends who were right there at the time. Look at these highly blessed beings that live solely for others. Enduring storm, showers, sunshine, and snow, they ward them off from us. Oh, enviable is the birth, serving as a means of subsistence to all animate beings, of these trees, approaching which suppliants never return disappointed any more than those that seek a benevolent man. By means of their leaves, flowers, fruits, shade, roots, bark, and wood, as well as with their fragrance, exudation, ashes, coal, and tender leaves, they gratify the desire of others. This much is the fruitfulness of the birth of embodied creatures in this world, that they should constantly do good alone to other embodied souls through their life, wealth, intellect, and speech. I'm just going to point out a point here that I find interesting, that it's rather remarkable that this text praises the exudation of trees separately from things like its leaves, its fruit, its bark, its wood, and even separately from its fragrance. Its exudation would seem to me most naturally to refer to oxygen. And it's just rather remarkable that this ancient scripture seems to know about that as a separate benefit of trees from aroma, from fruits, etc. Of course, it makes sense that if Krishna really said this, he would understand that. Saying so, the Lord arrived at the Yamuna, passing through rows of trees, whose boughs were bent low with clusters of young leaves, fruits, and blossoms, as well as with bunches of other leaves. Prompting the cows to drink of the very sweet, cool, and wholesome waters of the Yamuna, the Gopa boys then drank, O protector of men, to their heart's content, the tasteful water themselves. Pasturing the cattle at will in the grove on the bank of the Yamuna, O Raja, they approached Sri Krishna and Balarama and, pinched with hunger, spoke as follows. And this ends the 22nd discourse entitled The Lord Steals Away the Garments of the Gopi Maids, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 23, Redemption of the Wives of some Brahmanas engaged in a sacrifice. The Gopa boys said, O Balarama, the delighter of souls and possessed of extraordinary valor, O Krishna, the exterminator of the wicked, this hunger is actually pinching us. Be pleased to appease it. Sri Shuka resumed, thus requested by the Gopa boys, Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, who sought to shower his grace on certain Brahmana matrons devoted to him, spoke as follows. Repair to the sacrificial hall where certain Brahmans, who are expositors of the Vedas, are actually conducting a sacrificial session known by the name of Angirasa, with a desire to ascend to heaven after death. Arriving there, O cowherd boys, as dispatched by us, and mentioning the name of my venerable brother as well as my own name, ask some cooked rice of them. Thus instructed by the Lord, they went and solicited the Brahmanas, as directed with joined palms, and lying prostrate on the ground. O gods on the earth, listen to us. Know us, cowherd boys, to be the servants of Sri Krishna, arrived here, as directed by Balarama. May good betide you. Pasturing their cows, not very far from this place, and stricken with hunger, Balarama and Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, long to have boiled rice from you. Give them rice, O Brahmanas, when they earnestly ask for it, provided you have it, and if you possess any reverence for them, foremost as you are of all knowers of dharma. Indeed, anyone eating the food cooked in the house, even of a householder, consecrates for a sacrifice other than the one involving animal slaughter, and different from a sacrifice known with the name of Sautramani, O most righteous souls, is not defiled thereby. Though listening to the aforesaid solicitation of the Lord, the Brahmanas paid no heed to it, cherishing as they did petty hopes, though engaged in elaborate undertakings, and ignorant as they were, though accounting themselves advanced. The foolish Brahmanas, who regarded the mortal body as their own self, took no notice of Sri Krishna, who was no other than the Almighty Lord Vishnu, the supreme reality, constituting as he does the place and time, the diverse substance, the mystic formulae, the procedure, the priests, the fires, the divinities, the sacrificer, the act of sacrifice as well as the merit from the sacrifice. In other words, everything to do with the Vedic yajna that they're doing, Krishna embodies. But they were looking upon him as a mere human being through ignorance. When the Brahmanas neither said yes, nor did they say no, O chastiser of foes. They just completely ignored these kids who showed up at their door and asked for rice. The Gopa boys returned disappointed and informed Sri Krishna and Balarama accordingly. On hearing of it, the Almighty Lord of the universe burst into laughter and spoke to the Gopas again in order to show them the conduct of the worldly people who would not feel humiliated, much less relax their effort, even when their prayer was turned down once. Communicate to their wives the fact of my having arrived, along with Sankarshana. They will give you food according to your desire, affectionate as they are and living as they do in me through their mind. Presently, the Gopa boys went and found the virtuous wives of the Brahmanas, seated in the apartment reserved for the wives of the sacrificers, well adorned, and bowing to them, submissively spoke to them as follows. Hail to you, Brahmana ladies. Listen to our words. We have been sent here by Sri Krishna, who is rambling not very far from this place. Pasturing the cows in the company of other cowherd boys and accompanied by Balarama, he has come far away from home. Let some food be given to him, hungry as he is, along with his followers. Hearing of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, having come so near, the Brahmana ladies, who had been ever anxious to have a look at him, their mind having been lured by his stories, which evidently are spreading better among women than they are among men, were seized with a flurry, taking with them in vessels excellent food of 4 kinds, the 4 kinds being that which can be easily gulped, such as porridge, that which has to be chewed before it can be swallowed, that which can be licked, like chutney, and that which is sucked on, like from a stalk of sugarcane. They all marched towards their beloved Lord, like rivers flowing towards the ocean, even though they were being stopped by their husbands, brothers, and other relations, as well as by their sons, their mind being set on the illustrious Lord because of their having heard of him for a long time. The ladies presently beheld Sri Krishna sauntering in a grove on the bank of the Yamuna, beautified by fresh leaves of Ashoka trees, surrounded by other Gopa boys and accompanied by his elder brother. Dark of hue, he had about his loins a golden piece of silk, adorned with a garland of sylvan flowers, peacock feathers, and tender leaves, and painted with minerals. He presented the appearance of an actor on the stage. He rested one hand on the shoulder of a devoted companion and was swinging a lotus with the other hand. He wore a pair of water lilies on his ears and a smile on his lotus face, his curly locks hanging on his cheeks. Ushering into their heart by the gates of their eyes him on whom they had set their mind through the glories of that most loved one, which they had often heard and which had served as an embellishment for their ears, and embracing him there for a pretty long time, they shook off their agony of separation from him, even as men with an egotistic turn of mind are rid of their anguish on embracing an enlightened soul, O ruler of men. Even though he had come to know that they had arrived there under the aforesaid circumstances, with the desire to see him and having given up all hopes of any worldly desires otherwise, Sri Krishna, the witness of all minds, addressed them as follows with a smiling face. Welcome as your visit to this place, O highly blessed ladies. Let yourselves be comfortably seated. What can we do for you? It is but proper for you that you have come with a longing to see me. Surely the wise, who realize their own interests, duly practice disinterested and uninterrupted devotion, direct to me, their own beloved self. Indeed, who else could be dearer than one's own self, through contact with whom life and intellect, mind and body, kinsfolk, wife, progeny, and wealth, etc., are dear? In other words, that anything that's important to you is important to you because it is important to you. The self is clearly the root and center point of all joy and all value to any being. Therefore, return to the sacrificial hall, where your husbands, the Brahmana householders, will successfully conclude their sacrificial session with your help. The wives of the Brahmana said, It is not becoming of you, O Almighty Lord, to utter such cruel words. Vindicate the Vedic dictum, one does not return on having attained to me, they quote from the Vedas. Ignoring all our near and dear ones, we have sought the soles of your feet in order to wear on our locks the wreaths of tulsi leaves kicked off even indifferently at us by you. Neither our husbands, parents, and sons, nor our brothers, kinsmen, and other relations would accept us. How then would others receive us? Therefore, so ordain, O subduer of foes, that no other asylum may be left to us, whose body has fallen down at the forepart of your feet. The glorious Lord said, Your husbands, parents, brothers, sons, and other people will not be angry with you, since you have been favored by me. Even the gods approve of your conduct. Indeed, bodily contact with me does not tend to the gratification or to heighten the love of men in this world. Therefore, devoting your mind to me, you will attain me before long. Sri Shuka continued, Thus addressed by the Lord, the sages' wives, mentioned before, returned to the sacrificial grounds. Not finding fault with them, the sages too successfully concluded the sacrificial session with the help of their wives. One of those ladies, who was forcibly held back by her husband and not allowed to go and visit Krishna, mentally embraced the Lord even as she had heard of him, and cast off the body that had been brought about as a result of her past karmas. Having fed the cowherd boys with the same food of 4 kinds, Lord Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, too, though all-powerful himself, partook of it in the end after having fed everyone else. Thus imitating the ways of men and delighting the cows and cowherds as well as the gopis by his personal charm, speech, and doings, Lord Sri Krishna, who had assumed a human semblance for the sake of Leela, carried on his Leelas in Vraja. Presently, the aforesaid Brahmanas were filled with remorse to realize, through the words of their pious and devoted wives, that they had committed an offense and that they had turned down the solicitation of Balarama and Sri Krishna, the rulers of the universe, who were really the rulers of the universe and were only behaving as men. Perceiving the transcendent devotion of their womenfolk to Lord Sri Krishna, and full of regret to find that they had been devoid, that they themselves had been devoid of such devotion, they severely condemned themselves, saying things like, Fie upon our threefold birth, the threefold being physical birth, upanayana, samskara, the investiture with the sacred thread, and then the consecration for this particular yajna. And learning their mastery of the Vedas. Fie upon our sacred vow of continence for the duration of the yajna. Fie upon our versatile knowledge. Fie upon our pedigree, and fie upon our proficiency in rituals, when we have actually turned our face away from Lord Sri Krishna. Indeed, the Lord's Maya is capable of infatuating even those who are adept in yoga. That is why we who are Brahmanas and teachers of men are ignorant of our real interest, because they were deluded by the Lord's Maya. Oh, look at the devotion of our women to Sri Krishna, the Father of the universe, the depth of which cannot be easily fathomed by us, and which has cut asunder the snares of death going by the name of household ties that bound them. Neither was the purificatory rite, that of investiture with the sacred thread, which is peculiar to the men of the Dvija classes undergone by them, nor did they reside in the Guru's house for learning the Vedas. No austerities were ever performed by them, nor was any inquiry made about the spirit, nor is purity of personal habits seen in them, nor do any virtuous acts characterize them, yet there is actually found in them unswerving devotion to Sri Krishna of excellent renown, the Lord of all masters of yoga, while it does not appear in us, who have undergone the aforesaid purificatory rite and are endowed with all the other qualifications. O the Lord, who is the mainstay and the goal of the virtuous, awakened through the words of the Gopa boys, us, who were surely deluded in the matter of our real self-interest and whose judgment has been vitiated by our household activities. Otherwise, what could he gain through us who are subject to his control? He who has all his desires fulfilled and who is capable of bestowing all blessing, the highest of them being the final moksha. And his begging food of us too is a mere imitation. Supplication for boiled rice on the part of the Lord, whom the goddess Sri constantly waits upon with the hope of securing the touch of his feet, renouncing all others and giving up her own faults of fickleness, etc., deludes the common people. We have actually heard that the self-same Lord Vishnu, the ruler of all masters of yoga, who constitutes the time and place of performing a yajna, the diverse substances intended for being offered to the yajna fire, the mystic formulae employed for invoking the various deities and recited while pouring oblations into the sacred fire, the procedure of conducting a yajna, the priests officiating at a yajna, the sacrificial fires, the divinities sought to be propitiated through a sacrifice, the yajamana, the sacrificer, or the sponsor of the sacrifice, the act of yajna itself, and the religious merit flowing from a yajna performance, has himself appeared in the race of the Yadus, yet we could not recognize him, fools that we are. O most blessed are we, in whose lot have fallen such wives as these, through whose devotion our mind too has become irrevocably fixed on Sri Hari. Hail to you, the Almighty Lord Sri Krishna, whose intellect knows no obstruction. It is only because our judgment has been clouded by your Maya that we are wandering in the alleys of karma. May that most ancient person be pleased, as a matter of fact, to forgive the transgression on our part, who did not know his glory, infatuated as we were by his Maya. Recalling thus their own offense again and again, the aforesaid Brahmanas, who had shown disrespect to Sri Krishna by turning a deaf ear to his request for being supplied with boiled rice, did not stir out, afraid as they were of Kansa, though eager to behold of the two immortal brothers. So they didn't, because they were worried that they might draw Kansa's attention, they didn't actually go see him in person, but only addressed him in spirit, knowing, of course, that he is omniscient and will hear their prayers from wherever it's given. Thus ends the 23rd discourse, entitled The Redemption of the Wives of some Brahmanas Engaged in a Yajna, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that's probably a good stopping point for today. It's just after 10, and the next story we get into is a big, long, multi-discourse story, the famous story of Indra's Yajna and the lifting of the Govardhana hill.
Hey, Devala.
Yeah.
Just wanted to thank you because Makar Sanskranti we started last year. It is 1 year. I mean, according to solar.
Yeah. No, it's true. We started around Makara Sankranti last year. So yeah, we've been doing this for over a full year now.
Yes. And we are in book 10, right?
Yep, we're well into book 10. So at this rate, we'll, maybe 6 more months-ish, we would finish.
That's okay. We have no rush. We can restart. I don't mind. I love this.
Yeah.
But
anyway. Thanks so much, Devala.
Yeah, thank you all for coming and being part of this. And yeah, a bunch of you have been coming for a whole year. So yeah, I'm really happy to do this together.
Thank you so much. We're grateful. It's nice to hear the stories.
Yeah, especially these ones. These are the stories of Krishna's Leelas and Vraja are generally the most famous and most beloved part of the Bhagavatam for most people. It's definitely my favorite part.
Thank you, everybody. Just wanted to thank that. I feel very grateful.
Jai Shri Hari.
Jai Shri Hari.